PM. Very good morning to you.
Good morning, Michael.
You have seen the devastation that Michael Rennie just referred to in and around the Gold Coast, similarly in Cairns. What help is the federal government providing with Queenslanders so hard hit by these natural disasters?
Well, we're providing, on top of the $64 million that we had previously announced, more than $50 million between us and the Queensland government for packages affecting southeast Queensland, around the Gold Coast and the hinterland, but also here in far north Queensland. That includes a big tourism package we'll be announcing today of $20 million support for companies that are impacted. Yesterday we travelled north from Cairns up to Port Douglas and then to Wujal, which is largely an Indigenous community there on the Cape that's just been devastated. I'm sure you have footage of what's occurred there. It's quite shocking to see the damage that's been impacted on that community. And what we want to do is to make sure that that community can be up and running, people can get back to their homes as soon as possible. That's why yesterday as well we announced increased Australian Defence Force support in terms of personnel, equipment, but also temporary accommodation so that people can get back to those communities.
And heading to Victoria later today, similar help on the way for Victorians there too?
Oh, that's right. Look, we've had over Christmas and New Year impacts on the Gold Coast, far north Queensland, Western Australia, and now central and northern Victoria has been impacted as well. I'll be going to the State Emergency Headquarters with Acting Premier Ben Carroll later this afternoon to talk about what further support we can give and to receive an appropriate briefing. We know that the weather events are more extreme, more intense and more often, and it's not surprising, unfortunately, given that's what the science predicted from climate change. And we know the news this morning is that 2023 has been confirmed as the hottest year on record, and that is why we are seeing these devastating impacts when it comes to these weather events.
Let's turn to the cost of living now. This morning, Prime Minister, you've announced your former colleague, former Labor Minister Craig Emerson, will lead the government's review into the Food and Grocery Code. Firstly, this review was announced 3 months ago. Why has it taken so long to find somebody to head it?
Well, we've been continuing to work through the ACCC. This is just one aspect of the work that we've been undertaking. We've made that announcement, the decision to appoint Dr Emerson was made a while ago. We tend not to do new announcements in terms of appointments over the Christmas New Year period. So Dr Emerson has been already undertaking the work, and he's an appropriate person. What we're saying is here, the voluntary code of conduct that is currently run by industry, this will be an examination of whether further mandating is actually required, because we know that when we've seen a reduction in the cost to supermarkets, that hasn't been passed on in an appropriate way to consumers, and we want to make sure that that happens.
When you say mandating, so government intervention into to ensure supermarkets behave themselves is on the table here?
Well, everything's on the table because we want to make sure that consumers benefit. Our priority has been fighting inflation. That's why we've prioritised cost of living support that has put that downward pressure on inflation in cheaper childcare, cheaper medicines, our energy price relief plan that we've undertaken. That's why we produced the first budget surplus in 15 years. That's why we're addressing supply chain issues through fee-free TAFE and skills development and other measures as well. We want to make sure that we continue the fight against inflation because we know it has a more severe impact the less income that you have. And it's an equity issue, and that's why it's a priority for my government.
Speaking of tables, lots of Australian families, given it is the start of the year, will be sitting around their kitchen tables, PM, doing their family budgets for the year. And given they're only 6 months away now, a lot of families will be factoring into those budgets those stage 3 tax cuts. Can you promise to those Australian families the stage 3 tax cuts will come into effect in July in full?
Well, we haven't changed our position on that, Michael. I know that there's ongoing debate about the impact of those tax cuts, but we support reducing tax, and we've said that. And that's why, as well, we've been able to produce a budget surplus. We've factored that into the forward projections in the budget as well.
I'll ask that question again. Can you promise, as you did before the election, the stage 3 tax cuts will come in full in July?
Well, I've said we haven't changed our position.
But can you promise, Prime Minister?
Well, I've said I can't be clearer than that. We haven't changed our position.
That's not exactly a promise, PM.
Tax cuts.
It was a promise before the election. Has that promise changed?
Yeah, you can play word games, Michael. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. The government has exactly the same position. We're doing what we can to address cost of living pressures. Part of that will be giving income tax relief, and that income tax relief will be important for people.
You've got a big political test, Prime Minister, sometime in the next few months, care of the by-election in the seat of Dunkley, sadly, as a result of the popular long-time Labor member, your colleague, Peter Murphy. Labor holds that seat in Melbourne by a margin of more than 6%. Politically, that's one you really need to win, isn't it?
Well, we need to win every election, Michael, whenever it's held, wherever it's held. That's our objective, and the tragedy here that we've been dealing with as a Labor family, but also I know the community of Dunkley have been dealing with as well, is the tragic loss of Peter Murphy at age just 50 from breast cancer. She was an amazingly courageous local member, a strong advocate who right up until the week before she sadly passed away prematurely, she was there in Parliament having secured increased support for a range of measures dealing with these health consequences, particularly breast cancer, but other issues as well. She is sadly missed, and to Rod Glover, her husband of more than 2 decades, and to all of the community based around that Frankston area in southeast Melbourne, I know that they're still grieving, still going through that process.
Prime Minister, I want to finish with an issue, sadly, that has continued over Christmas and the New Year period, and that is the disturbingly high number of women who are dying as a result of domestic violence. Last year, and figures vary, but at least 60 women died at the hands of their intimate partner. Personally speaking, it makes me sick every time I have to present one of these stories to our audience, and I know all levels of government, including yours, have various action plans in place to reduce the number of women dying at the hands of their intimate partners, but these deaths are continuing. Is it a time in 2024, PM, for all governments to double down on what is on every front a national crisis?
It certainly is, Michael. One death is one too many. The fact that you have more than one a week is just a national tragedy. It's a tragedy for the women and the children who are left behind as well. It's a tragedy as well for, on top of those figures, those people who aren't able to leave violent circumstances because they don't see that there are alternatives for them. And that's why a major part of our Housing Australia Future Fund legislation was providing increased support for accommodation for women and children escaping domestic violence. That's why we need all levels of government, but also, can I say this too, Michael, all levels of our society. This is something that can't be solved by government alone. We all have a responsibility here. Men in particular have a responsibility to call out this behaviour, and it is just a scourge. And I know that when you look at the figures, people in every community are impacted by this. And over the Christmas New Year period, we saw more disturbing and horrifying stories about the impact that domestic violence has. We have funded increased community workers as a result of one of the commitments we took to the last election, but the figures remain stubbornly far, far too high.
You're right there, Prime Minister. Governments and certainly men need to step up and do a whole lot more. Really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael.